On Sunday the 5th of March, earlier this year, a 37-year-old father of two named Dexter Wade said goodbye to his mother as he left her home in Jackson, Mississippi. But little did she know, this would be the last time she would ever see her son alive. According to the police, shortly after leaving the residence, Dexter then made his way to Interstate 55, where he supposedly attempted to walk across a busy highway. But due to this dangerous decision, he was unfortunately struck down by an SUV that was being driven by an off-duty police officer and was immediately declared dead on the scene. However, after failing to update his family on what had happened, Dexter's mother, Dexter Wade, eventually reported him missing around a week after she had last seen him, hoping the police would be able to locate her son. But rather suspiciously, the missing persons unit were completely unaware of Dexter's fatal incident a week prior, and so, rather than informing her on what had happened, they instead opened an official missing person investigation for a man who was already deceased. And then, it wasn't until 5 months later that this apparent communication error was finally acknowledged by a police officer, and Betterston was updated on the situation, also being told that her son had been buried in an unmarked grave. So, with this extensive list of controversial details surrounding Dexter Wade's case, it is no surprise that many have started to wonder, was this really just an accident brought on by drug abuse and mental illness, or could the police be trying to cover up the truth behind his death? Dexter Alex Wade was born on the 21st of November in 1985 in Jackson, Mississippi, where he was the middle child of his family, being raised by his devoted mother, Betterston Robinson Wade. Little is known about his childhood, but what we do know is that as he moved into adolescence, Dexter began a relationship with a young woman, and eventually they would welcome two beautiful daughters into the world, named Jonelle and Jocelyn. However, despite his newfound responsibility, it wasn't long before Dexter started to descend into the world of criminality, as he would cross paths with the police on numerous occasions in desperate attempts to provide for his family. But despite his rather notorious background, Dexter didn't let these incidents define him, as beneath the hard exterior was an extremely caring individual who was always looking for ways to help the people around him. So much so, that after his second stint in prison ended in 2017, he decided to turn over a new leaf by dedicating his life to the local community, where he would spend most of his time with the less fortunate, handing out free food to the homeless. It should also be noted that life was never easy for Dexter, as he would later be diagnosed with bipolar disorder alongside schizophrenia, and was therefore forced to take prescription medication to combat his mental illnesses. But on the bright side, with his mindset now being straightened out, he was quickly becoming a new man, and for the first time in his life, was looking forward to the future. So, perhaps this is why it came as such a shock to his family, when he would suddenly disappear on that fateful day. On Sunday the 5th of March, the 37-year-old man was at his mother's house with a friend, when he announced that they were leaving together at around 7:30 p.m. According to his mother, just before Dexter left, she had got into a heated argument with him over a broken window in the house, but it is unknown if the conflict was resolved by the time he walked out. Nevertheless, Dexter and his friend then set off down the street on foot and began walking along McDowell Road towards Interstate 55. We cannot confirm the exact details of his actions that followed, but based on what would happen next, it would be safe to assume that he continuously walked for around 20 minutes, until eventually arriving at Frontage Road. Now, whether or not Dexter was still with his friend at this point has not been disclosed, but either way, the next step in his journey was to attempt to cross the busy highway for reasons completely unknown. And then, as he stepped foot onto Interstate 55, it wasn't long before he was struck down by a passing SUV, where he was unfortunately killed upon impact. The driver of the car was then revealed to be an off-duty police officer who immediately called into the station to report the incident. But strangely, despite being able to identify the body, Dexter's family were not notified by the authorities. And then to make matters even worse, as this devastating situation was unfolding, Dexter's poor mother, Betterston, was completely unaware of what had happened to her son. And so, As the days passed with no messages or updates from Dexter, she officially reported him missing approximately 1 week later. On Tuesday the 14th of March, Dexter Wade called the Jackson Police Department to explain that she had not heard from her son in 7 days, and rightfully so, wanted to file a missing persons report. However, despite knowing exactly where Dexter was, for some reason, the missing persons unit were not notified of the situation, and so, rather than providing his mother with the devastating truth, they instead offered their sympathies and promised to open a missing person investigation. Well, days soon passed with no further updates from the police, and with this, Dexter's concern only grew, as she knew that with each day Dexter remained missing, the likelihood of his safe return would quickly diminish. So, with her anxiety towards the situation understandably rising, she attempted to call the police once again around 2 weeks after filing the report, to see if they had uncovered any more useful information. On Monday the 27th of March, the Jackson Police Department would deliver the bad news to Dexter's mother, claiming that after 2 weeks of searching for her son, they were still yet to find any leads in their investigation. However, they assured Dexter that they would continue looking and would update her as soon as they knew more. But once again, time continued to fly by with no discernible information being revealed to the restless family, and as the days turned into weeks, weeks quickly turned into months, and so the concern for Dexter's safety was now at an all-time high. His mother had already been calling the Jackson Police Department every 2 weeks since he first disappeared, so with time quickly slipping away, she was beginning to lose hope that she would ever find out what really happened to her missing son. But thankfully, it wasn't too much longer before Dexter would finally learn the truth, when she received a surprising phone call from a police officer 5 months on from that fateful day. On Thursday the 24th of August, the former police officer that was in charge of Dexter's missing person case had retired and a new officer had taken their place. It was only then that the Jackson PD would finally learn the truth and reveal to Dexter's mother that her missing son had been located. Now, despite knowing there was a strong possibility that Dexter was no longer alive, it was no less devastating to officially hear the harrowing words. But to Dexter's utter shock, after asking what had happened to her boy, she could never have anticipated what would soon be revealed. According to the officer, Dexter had lost his life while trying to cross Interstate 55, a highway which was located just 1 mile away from her home in Mississippi. But she was equally mortified to learn that this incident had actually taken place just 24 minutes after she had last seen him alive. This was the moment reality finally sunk in for Dexter, as she realized that despite what she had been told for almost half a year, her son had actually been deceased the entire time, and matters only worsened when she was informed that his remains had been buried in an unmarked grave. Well, understandably furious with the police, she demanded that they exhume the body so she could give her son the proper burial he was entitled to. But once again, the situation only grew in controversy, when on the day of the exhumation, the police decided to conduct the process before Dexter had arrived on the scene. The original plan was to exhume the body at 11:30 am, but for an unexplained reason, the authorities instead decided to conduct it at 8:30 am, meaning by the time Dexter's family arrived, he had already been taken out of the ground and was on his way to be examined by the coroner. So, as you can imagine, Dexter was outraged with the situation, and rightfully so. Once again, the police had kept her in the dark, and she was left with no other choice but to start contemplating the possibility of some sort of cover-up. Now, unfortunately, that's all we know about the case for now, but the Mississippi Bureau of Investigation will surely be looking into this grave injustice to make sure a situation like this never occurs again. However, despite the authorities claiming that the communication errors in this case were purely accidental, this hasn't stopped the Wade family, along with the majority of the public, to assume that there may be something nefarious going on behind the scenes. After all, why else would the police decide to exhume Dexter's body without the presence of his grieving mother? So with that, let's get into some of the potential theories. Now, if you're familiar with my channel, you'll be aware that usually in these videos I choose to start with the least controversial theory, in an attempt to give the police the benefit of the doubt. But in this particular case, quite frankly, I feel like they don't deserve it, given their severe gross misconduct in communication. Even if this was a simple accident, how the Jackson PD were unable to inform Dexter's family of what had happened for 5 months, this is something that simply cannot be forgiven. So before I go into the details surrounding how such an outrageous mistake like this could ever occur, I'd prefer to start with the more provocative explanation, which is that Dexter's death may have been covered up. Now, one key detail that I think should be mentioned first is that even if Dexter's body was discovered without any identification, it would have been easy to identify him from his fingerprints, as he was a convicted felon that had served time in prison. So, given that the police were also able to find his mother's home address on a bottle of prescription medication, there was simply no excuse for the police to be unable to contact the family. It was also later revealed that the phone number that they had on file for Dexter's mother was correct, so once again, there was absolutely no good reason why they couldn't have contacted her. To add further fuel to the fire, the fact that it was a police officer that hit Dexter on the highway would also allude to a potential cover-up, as the police department may not have wanted the news to break that another black person was killed by the police in Mississippi. So, based on these reasons, they would have certainly had a strong motive to hide the truth from Dexter's family and the rest of the world. Another point to add is that the officer responsible for handling the missing person case was planning on retiring in the next few months, so they may have taken a metaphorical bullet for their guilty co-worker, knowing that they had nothing to lose anymore. Now, of course, I should quickly mention that this is all just speculation on my part, and I'm simply making assumptions based on the evidence available. But you can't deny that there is a serious amount of weight towards a potential cover-up in this case. But believe it or not, there is still further proof that a few officers within the Jackson PD may have potentially had an extremely strong motive to keep the truth hidden, as just 4 years prior, Dexter's 62-year-old uncle was also killed by a Jackson PD officer. According to the report from 2019, a callous Jackson police officer forcefully slammed Dexter's uncle to the ground. The officer was tried and convicted on a charge of manslaughter, and the Wade family filed a lawsuit against the police on the grounds of wrongful death, saying police used excessive force and shady methods in an attempt to conceal their actions. The family also claimed the officers weren't properly trained or supervised. In fact, this incident was so impactful that Dexter Wade was advised by her own mother that it was useless to call the police in the case of Dexter going missing, implying that the authorities would do her wrong, just like they did before. So based on this experience, you can certainly see why Dexter would be so skeptical of the Jackson Police Department. After all, both her brother and her son were killed by the same department, just 4 years apart, and in both situations, the resulting cases were handled terribly. However, despite the mass amounts of evidence that are stacking up, could it still be possible that the Jackson Police Department are honestly so incompetent that all of this was just a simple misunderstanding? Well, before I go into more detail about how this could be a possibility, I'd first like to draw your attention to another recent case in Mississippi, which is that of Marrio Moore, another black man that went missing earlier this year, only for his family to be notified of his death after 8 months. Now, with this particular case, not only were the family unaware that their loved one was deceased, but they also had to find out all on their own by researching unreported homicides in Jackson, Mississippi, and discovering Marrio's name on the list. According to the police report, his cause of death was recorded as blunt force trauma, meaning he was very likely murdered by somebody on the streets of Jackson. But for whatever reason, the police once again failed to inform the family of this bleak discovery, and similar to Dexter Wade, his body was also buried in an unmarked grave. Now, a more contentious angle you could take here would be that there may be a serial killer hidden inside the Jackson Police Department, but to be completely transparent, I personally do not feel this is the case. If anything, it seems to further back the theory of police incompetence as it would appear that Dexter Wade's unfortunate story is not the only one. So with this thought in mind, what else could allude to Dexter Wade's mishandled case being the simple result of a failure in communication? Well, according to the mystery novel writer Daniel Friedman, he certainly believes that this is exactly what happened, as he would later write on Twitter. First of all, there is no racism involved in the police department's treatment of Dexter Wade or the Wade family. The population of Jackson is 82% black, the mayor is black, and the top brass in the police department are also black. Friedman also went on to say, the lack of news coverage would seem to indicate that the officers involved are likely of white complexion. In fact, the only investigator identified by name was LeGrand Elliott, who is again a black man. To provide some context, Elliot was the investigator who found the pill bottle with Dexter's information on it and traced down the family. He says he tried to call Dexter's mother and could not reach her, and Betterston claims that she could not produce the phone records to disprove this fact. Also, LeGrand Elliott, who appears to be a contractor rather than a permanent Jackson PD employee, was said to have passed off the case to the Accident Investigation Squad, who for some reason failed to reach Dexter's mother as well. Meanwhile, she was in touch with an investigator in the missing persons unit, who also failed to discover that Dexter's body was in the morgue. This investigator then retired, and his replacement figured everything out almost immediately. So this guy either wasn't doing any work, or didn't know how to access the city's computerized records. Meanwhile, the accident investigators who were supposed to notify the family didn't seem to try very hard to get in touch. Nobody was covering anything up, they just weren't very good at their jobs and weren't trying very hard. Now, to be fair, it's certainly no secret that Jackson's government is notoriously plagued by corruption, inefficiency, and general dysfunction. City officials have even come out to say that they don't receive enough resources from the state to properly staff their agencies or maintain their infrastructure. So based on the words of Daniel Friedman, as well as some of the other evidence available, it would certainly seem there is a case to be made that Dexter Wade's story was simply just the result of incompetence, rather than a wider conspiracy theory to cover up a hate crime. However, either way, the poor performance of the Jackson PD needs to be put under a microscope, whether to find justice for Dexter and his family, or to prevent future mistakes from occurring that could potentially destroy the lives of other families in Mississippi. Anyway, with that, I think I'll leave this video here, but if you have any opinions of your own that you'd like to express, please leave your comments down below and I will do my best to get back to you. But until then, thank you so much for watching, and don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss any case updates. Also, if you found this video interesting, make sure to check out the playlist on screen now, where I've covered a range of similar cases including Rasheem Carter, who was another man from Mississippi that many believe was a victim of a modern day lynching.